faith is among the most confusing, and the reason for this is because there's at least 5 active definitions used in everyday life, and people unfortunately rarely realise which definition they're using at a particular time. This is Arguments from Faith Debunked. The single greatest bit of advice that I can give to someone who's been presented with an argument from faith is to get the proponent to first very clearly declare which definition of the word faith they're using, and to then help them put their argument into a syllogistic form. The reason for this is because the word faith means many things to many people, and if we want to effectively communicate with one another, which is the very point of rational discourse, then we simply must make sure that we first understand each other by ensuring that we're using the same language and definitions. And so, let's start by putting a few of the most relevant definitions on the table. A first is a particular religion, as in, he has a Christian faith, or my faith is Hellenic polytheism. A second is a strongly held belief, as in, I have a strong political faith, or I have faith that Floyd Mayweather will defeat Conor McGregor. A third is belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of something or someone, which is actually the definition of the word trust, as in, I have trust, I mean faith, in the scientific method. Or, I will walk across this bridge because I trust, I mean have faith that it will support my way. And while we're on the topic of trust, a fourth definition is trust or confidence in a person or thing, as in, I'm putting my faith in you. Or, I have faith that the fire alarm will go off in the event of a fire. And a fifth is belief without sufficient evidence, and often in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Or, as Matt Dillahunty puts it, the excuse people give when they believe something and don't have a good reason. Or, as Aaron Ra puts it, the belief that if you believe something hard enough, then reality will somehow change, that you can wish things to happen. As in, I know that Xenu exists because I have faith. Or, I have faith that when I die, I will be consciously reunited with my loved ones. Now we could continue to list more definitions, but honestly, there's no need. The point has been made. There are many definitions of the word faith, and people frequently use them interchangeably, which makes them extremely susceptible to committing equivocation fallacies. And that, good sirs and ladies, is the primary flaw with arguments from faith. They're quite simply the embodiment of the equivocation fallacy. An equivocation fallacy occurs when an argument alternates between 2 or more different definitions of a word or term throughout its premises in order to achieve its conclusion, and thus it renders its conclusion invalid. For example, trees have branches. My bank has branches all over the world. Therefore, my bank is a tree. In this case, during premise 1 we're using a definition of the word branch that is, a part of a tree which grows out from a trunk or from a bough. Whereas in premise 2 we're using a definition of the word branch that is, one of the offices or groups that form part of a large business organisation, and hence, we can't conclude that my bank is a tree, because in doing so, we're equivocating the word branch. Now in the case of arguments from faith, the equivocation fallacy isn't always as easy to spot, and that's why I recommend that you help the proponent put their argument into a syllogistic form. For example, if a proponent was to assert that you have faith in science like they have faith in God, you could lay out their argument as follows. Alice has faith that science works, like Robert has faith that God exists, and therefore both Alice and Robert have faith. From here, you can point out that they are, either consciously or unconsciously, using a definition of faith that is, belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of something or someone during premise 1, but a definition of faith that is, belief without sufficient evidence, and often in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary during premise 2, and hence their conclusion is invalid. Their bank isn't a tree. Now it's worth noting that, in response to this, they might insist that you're wrong, and that they're actually using exclusively the first definition throughout their entire argument. But if they do this, all you have to do is explain that people, including them, believe in the reliability, truth, and ability of science because it consistently produces effective results, and because it's based on objective, verifiable evidence. And then simply point out that their belief in God isn't based on such rigorous objectivity, and that if they insist that it is, then they must provide such evidence, because if they can't, then despite their protestations to the contrary, they are believing in a God without sufficient evidence. Moving on, let's look at another argument from faith. A proponent might say that you have faith that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, in just the same way that they have faith that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, which syllogistically would go as follows. Alice has faith that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, like Robert has faith that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, and therefore both Alice and Robert have faith. Now, as you've likely noticed, within this argument they're conflating the method that you use to arrive at your conviction with the method that they use to arrive at theirs, by simply labelling both methods faith. Now, assuming that you can't personally present the evidence or articulate how scientists have determined the age of the Earth, it would be fair to say that you have trust, or, to use their deliberately confusing word, faith that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. But the reason that you have trust in this claim is because it's been heavily peer-reviewed by scientists from all over the world and from countless fields of study. Or in other words, it's a claim that's entirely predicated on the extremely and demonstrably reliable scientific method. While, conversely, they have trust or faith that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old without sufficient evidence, and in the face of mountains of evidence to the contrary. Or in other words, their claim is entirely predicated on the extremely and demonstrably unreliable religious method. And finally, I want to very briefly tackle a particular definition of faith that's sometimes used by Christians. In Hebrews 11:1, faith is defined as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And what makes this definition extra tricky is that the proponents very often commit an equivocation fallacy with just the word seen, and so you'll have to ask them politely to define it. If they define it to mean to discern or deduce mentally, then they're unwittingly redefining the word faith to literally mean understand, which is a disingenuous and confusing move that can be best exposed by presenting them with several sentences with the word understand replaced with the word faith. For example, I understand that 1 + 1 = 2 becomes I have faith that 1 + 1 = 2. Or, I understand how evolution by natural selection occurs becomes I have faith that evolution by natural selection occurs. But if they define it to mean perceive without vision, then technically they have faith that the oven is hot, that certain food is spicy, and that their farts don't stink. They're doing everything they can to avoid the inconvenient truth that they are believing without sufficient evidence. To recap, arguments from faith are flawed because they commit an equivocation fallacy. And the proponents of arguments from faith are flawed because, despite their protestations to the contrary, they are believing in things without sufficient evidence, and often in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. They are playing, like it or not, a bait and switch word game. As always, thank you kindly for the view.